The Great Pyramid of Giza is a masterpiece of precision and weight, but its true secret lies not in the stones you see, but in the incredible journey they took to get there. The real wonder of ancient monuments is the invisible web of supply chains, labor management, and transportation that spanned entire continents. This was a logistical ballet performed without a single modern machine. By the end of this video, you will understand the hidden systems that allowed empires to literally move mountains. How did builders coordinate thousands of workers across impossible distances? What forgotten highways carried 100-ton blocks over rugged mountains? The answers reveal a sophistication that rivals our own. What does it say about us that our ancestors could plan so far ahead? The Easter Island statues stand as a perfect paradox of ancient logistics. On a remote island, a community without metal tools, wheels, or large animals managed to carve and move nearly 900 massive stone figures, some weighing over 80 tons. The question of how they did this has captivated us for generations, but it points to a much larger truth. The silent, invisible engine behind every ancient wonder was not magic, but a masterful system of logistics. This was the art and science of moving mountains, literally. It transformed scattered resources and thousands of hands into a single, coordinated force. Ancient logistics was the integrated system that managed everything from finding the perfect quarry stone to feeding the workforce, from designing a sled that wouldn't sink into mud to creating a calendar that told workers when to arrive. It was a breathtaking exercise in foresight and coordination, a kind of prehistoric project management that operated on a continental scale. This system required understanding geography, human psychology, seasonal weather, and material science, all without a single spreadsheet or email. The builders weren't just strong, they were brilliant planners. They solved puzzles of supply and demand that would challenge a modern engineer. To move a 100-ton block across miles of rugged Easter Island terrain, brute force alone would have been useless. It demanded a clever, coordinated system, a shared plan that every participant understood. This is our core theme. The true monument was not just the final temple or statue, but the hidden network that made it possible. That network always started with one critical question: where do you find the materials and how do you get them from there to here? The answer would forge the first links in a supply chain spanning continents. The first and most critical link in any ancient supply chain began with a single, monumental decision. Where do we find the stone? This was not a simple matter of finding a big rock. It was a sophisticated exercise in geological prospecting, one that often sent scouts hundreds of miles from the intended construction site. The perfect stone had to be flawless, massive, and possess the right aesthetic and physical properties, all while being accessible enough to move. In Egypt, the most prized material for obelisks and sarcophagi was a specific pink granite, found only in the quarries near Aswan, over 500 miles south of the pyramids at Giza. Imagine the foresight required. A master builder at Giza would commission a monolithic obelisk, and teams would be dispatched to the distant south, not just to cut stone, but to find the exact, unblemished vein within the mountain that could yield a single 200-ton needle of stone. How did they know which piece to cut? Historians and archaeologists point to a technique called sounding. Workers would tap the granite with smaller stones, listening intently to the ring. A clear, bell-like tone indicated solid, flawless rock. A dull thud betrayed hidden cracks or weaknesses that could shatter the entire monolith during extraction or transport. This auditory test was a form of ancient quality control, performed on a gigantic scale, but finding the stone was only the beginning of the commitment. Quarries like those at Aswan became permanent industrial settlements. Workers lived there for generations. their entire society organized around the single purpose of extracting and shaping stone. They carved ramps and trenches directly into the bedrock, creating precise negative spaces around each block. They smoothed transport corridors leading from the quarry face to the river's edge, highways worn deep by centuries of dragging stone. This pattern repeated across the world, with the source material dictating the entire logistical blueprint. The Romans built their empire with travertine from Tivoli, a stone so integral that roads and canals were engineered specifically to serve those quarries. High in the Andes, the Inca selected andesite for its durability and beauty, hauling it from mountaintop quarries down impossibly steep slopes to sacred sites like Machu Picchu. In each case, the choice of material was the first domino. It determined the route, the method, and the sheer human effort required. The quarry was not just a hole in the ground, it was the beating heart of the operation, the origin point of a journey that would test the limits of an empire's organizational power. And once that perfect stone was freed from the earth, the next, even greater challenge began. How do you move a small mountain? Freeing the stone was a triumph of geology and patience. But it was a hollow victory without the human force to move it. This introduces the second pillar of ancient logistics, an architecture not of stone but of people. How do you mobilize, organize, and sustain an army of thousands for decades? The scale is almost incomprehensible. For the Great Pyramid, estimates suggest a rotating workforce of around 20,000 individuals. The popular image of endless lines of slaves driven by the lash is a modern myth, one that archaeology has soundly dismantled. The evidence points to something far more sophisticated and revealing. At the foot of the Giza plateau, excavations have uncovered not a prison camp, but a planned, bustling city. This workers' settlement had orderly streets, large communal bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves daily, facilities for processing fish, and even what appear to be medical centers for treating injuries and illness. They had breweries providing a nutritious, safe drink. This was not a place of mere survival. It was a carefully engineered ecosystem designed to maintain a vast, skilled labor force. The logistics of food alone are staggering. To feed that many people required a supply chain stretching across the Nile Delta, with fleets of boats bringing grain, cattle, and produce on a daily schedule. This was a state-level operation, a precursor to modern corporate catering on a monumental scale. But who were these workers? Research suggests a tiered, highly organized system. At its core was a small, permanent elite of master engineers, architects, and skilled artisans. These were the project's brain trust. Supporting them was the massive body of seasonal laborers. Many were likely conscripted through a system known as Corvée, a form of labor tax where citizens contributed a period of service to the state, often during the Nile's annual flood when farming was impossible. This was not slavery, it was a civic duty, and it came with compensation in the form of food, shelter, and likely a sense of participation in a grand national project. Think of it as a massive, rotating draft. A crew from a distant province would arrive for a 3-month stint, housed and fed in the workers' city, contributing their muscle to the collective effort, and then return home, replaced by a fresh crew from another region. This system solved multiple problems at once. It prevented local famine by employing idle hands during the inundation. It distributed the physical burden across the population, and it created a continuous, renewable labor pool. Motivation, then, likely came from a mix of practical benefit, social obligation, and perhaps even pride. Being part of such an awe-inspiring project, one that connected you to the divine and eternal, would have been a powerful incentive. This human resource framework was, in its own way, as meticulously constructed as the monuments it built. It was a social machine, every cog from baker to barge captain to stone hauler essential to the whole. It turned the abstract idea of a pyramid into a sustained human endeavor that could outlast any single lifetime. Yet, even with a well-fed, motivated army, the physical problem remained. How do you translate that human power into motion to make a 200-ton block of granite walk across 500 miles of desert? The stone was cut, the workforce assembled, but the distance remained an unyielding fact. This brings us to the third pillar of ancient logistics, the masterstroke that turned geography from an enemy into an ally, the engineered transport route. Picture not a simple path but a continental nervous system. The most breathtaking example is not found in the desert but high in the clouds. The Quipu, the royal road of the Inca Empire, was a staggering feat of civil engineering that wove together a territory longer than the distance from New York to Los Angeles. This was a highway network built for a society that did not use the wheel for transport, designed instead for the swift movement of imperial messengers and the steady flow of goods on the backs of llamas and human porters. To call it a road is to undersell its sophistication. It was a meticulously planned instrument of control and supply, the literal and figurative path that connected quarry to temple, mine to workshop, and province to capital. Its construction reveals a profound understanding of landscape, materials, and human endurance. Engineers did not simply follow the easiest terrain, they conquered the impossible. They carved staircases into sheer cliff faces, built causeways across treacherous swamps, and tunneled through solid rock where a mountainside refused to yield. The roadbed itself was engineered for longevity and drainage, layered with gravel and stone, often bordered by low walls or marker stones. But the most iconic and perhaps most nerve-wracking features were the bridges. Spanning deep river gorges in the Andes, the Inca built suspension bridges woven not from steel cable but from native grasses. These were not fragile footpaths. Teams of specialists would braid thick ropes, some as wide as a person's torso, from pliable fibers. These cables were then stretched across the chasm, anchored to stone abutments, and woven together into a walkway that could sway in the mountain winds. Remarkably, this organic technology was so reliable that some of these bridges remained in use for centuries, maintained and renewed by local communities as part of their service to the network. This infrastructure was useless, however, without support stations. At intervals of a day's travel, the Inca built way stations called Tambos. These were not just rest stops, they were state-run logistical hubs. They provided shelter, stored food and supplies for imperial personnel, and held reserves of tools and materials. A messenger running the Chasquis relay could sprint from one tambo to the next, pass his message to a fresh runner, and rest, while information flew across the empire at a speed Europeans would not match for centuries. For construction, this network was the supply line's backbone. How did andesite blocks reach the remote heights of Machu Picchu? They likely traveled a significant portion of their journey on this very road system. Smaller, precious goods like ceremonial metals, exotic feathers, or fine textiles moved swiftly. Heavier materials moved slowly in a constant, organized trickle. Llamas, the only pack animal available, could carry modest loads, but for the largest stones, it was again human power, coordinated and directed along these engineered pathways, that did the work. The road reduced a chaotic, vertical wilderness into a manageable, mapped sequence of segments. It turned an empire of isolated valleys into a single, connected organism. This was planning on a geographic scale we are still working to fully comprehend, a testament to the vision that saw not just a monument, but the entire journey required to create it. Yet, even with a perfect road, a final, physical challenge awaited at the construction site itself. How do you lift these mountains of stone into the sky? The final ascent, lifting stone onto stone, was a problem of pure physics. With no cranes or hydraulics, ancient engineers had to become masters of leverage, transforming limited muscle power into controlled, monumental force. This fourth pillar of logistics was about creating the original engines, using nothing but animals, human ingenuity, and an intimate understanding of simple machines. In Egypt, the classic image is of workers dragging a colossal statue on a massive wooden sledge. Tomb paintings show this clearly, but they often leave out the critical detail that made it possible. Researchers believe these sledges didn't just scrape across the desert sand. They likely moved along prepared tracks, with a liquid poured ahead to reduce friction. An experiment led by physicists demonstrated that wetting the sand in front of a sledge dramatically lowers the pulling force required. The water creates a firm, slick surface, almost like a temporary artificial ice rink made of sand. This wasn't just about brute strength, it was about cleverly manipulating the environment to do the hard work. For ramps leading up the side of a pyramid, the challenge multiplied. Here, teams might have used a combination of sledges, wooden rollers placed underneath, and ropes. It was a slow, rhythmic process, a chant and pull system where coordination was everything. A misstep could mean a runaway block and catastrophe. Now, consider a continent away where the challenge was even more extreme. In Mesoamerica, civilizations like the Olmec and Maya had no large draft animals at all. No oxen, no horses, no elephants. Every ounce of motive power for their enormous stone heads and temple blocks came from human bodies. So how did they move a 10-ton basalt head 60 miles from the quarry to a ceremonial center? The answer lies in a deceptively simple tool, the Tump line. This is a strap that goes across the forehead or chest, allowing a porter to carry a tremendous load on their back. But for monoliths, the system scaled up. Evidence suggests they used a form of coordinated team lifting, likely combining log rollers, ropes, and levers. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of individuals would work in unison, rolling the stone onto a bed of logs. As the stone moved forward, porters behind would pick up the freed logs and run them to the front, creating a continuous rolling track. It was a human-powered conveyor belt, an exhausting, meticulous ballet of timing and shared effort. The lever, perhaps the oldest simple machine, was their ultimate force multiplier. A team could use a long wooden pole, pivot it on a stone, and with synchronized pressure, coax a massive block upward or adjust its angle by mere inches at a time. This reflects a profound physical calculus. In a world without engines, energy was the most precious commodity. You couldn't just add more fuel, you had to optimize every single movement. The logistics planners had to calculate not just the route but the human cost in calories. How many porters does this block require? How far can they move it in a day before exhaustion sets in? What food intake is needed to replenish that energy? It was a dance of biomechanics and endurance, where the health and morale of the workforce were as critical as the engineering of the ramp. The true engine was not the muscle, but the system that organized those muscles into a single, sustained, rhythmic force. It turned the chaotic power of a crowd into the directed, patient power of a machine. And this entire vast endeavor, from quarry to capstone, required one final, invisible element to hold it all together. How did you coordinate thousands of people across hundreds of miles over decades without a single telephone or printed memo? The answer lies in the original information technology, a system of communication and record-keeping that made the impossible plan possible. While human muscle and engineered roads conquered land, the heaviest loads often found their truest ally in the water. This is the fifth pillar of ancient logistics, the mastery of water-borne highways. For civilizations blessed with great rivers, these were not just sources of water, they were liquid superhighways, nature's own conveyor belts capable of moving weights that would cripple any land-based system. The ancient Egyptians did not merely live beside the Nile, they engineered their entire civilization around its predictable, life-giving pulse. Their greatest logistical secret weapon was the annual inundation. Each year, the river would flood, spreading fertile silt across the fields, and crucially, bringing its high water mark much closer to the desert plateau where the pyramids would rise. Master builders timed their heaviest shipments with this seasonal event. Imagine the scene at the Aswan quarries, a 200-ton obelisk carefully loaded onto a purpose-built, massive barge. This vessel itself was a feat of engineering, likely constructed from cedar timbers imported from distant Lebanon, designed for immense buoyancy and stability. As the floodwaters rose, this barge, carrying a literal mountain of stone, would be set adrift. It did not fight the current but used it. The river became a slow, powerful, moving road. The journey north to Giza, a distance of over 500 miles, would have been a matter of controlled drifting, guided by teams in smaller boats with ropes and poles. The water did almost all the work, bearing a load that would have required tens of thousands of haulers on land. Upon arrival near the Giza plateau, canals dug right to the construction site's edge allowed the barge to be maneuvered almost to the foot of the ascending ramps. The stone was then transferred directly to its land-based sledges, its longest and most arduous journey already complete. This system transformed a geographic obstacle into the project's greatest asset. It was logistics in harmony with nature's calendar. This principle was not unique to Egypt. Half a world away, in China, a later empire would undertake an even more audacious act of hydrological engineering to serve its logistical needs. The Grand Canal, whose earliest sections date back over 2,500 years, was not built for irrigation alone. It was built for control and supply. This artificial river, linking the fertile Yangtze Basin to the political heartland in the north, became the spine of the empire. When the Ming dynasty rebuilt the Forbidden City in Beijing, they faced a problem. The finest timber and the most beautiful marble came from mountains hundreds of miles to the southwest. The land route was impossibly long and difficult for such heavy, delicate materials. The solution was the Grand Canal. Giant logs and huge blocks of marble were loaded onto specialized, shallow draft barges. Teams of trackers on the canal banks would then physically pull these vessels along the calm, predictable artificial waterway. It was a slow, methodical, but relentless process. A single marble column for the imperial palace might travel for months, moving from barge to barge, canal to river, in a carefully coordinated relay. This aquatic network required its own deep knowledge. Engineers had to understand hydrology, seasonal water levels, and barge construction to prevent catastrophic sinkings. They built locks and sluice gates to manage elevation changes, creating a staircase of water that could lift precious cargo over hills. The river or canal was more than a path, it was a dynamic, living part of the machine. Yet, even the most perfectly planned water journey reached its end, and the stone had to be unloaded, shaped, and placed with impossible precision. Floating a block to the site was one thing, carving it perfectly and lifting it into position was another. This final challenge demanded a toolkit of specialized innovations, the clever, physical keys that turned grand plans into solid reality. A copper chisel seems laughably soft against unyielding granite. Yet the perfect, mirror-smooth surfaces of ancient sarcophagi prove it was done. This reveals the sixth pillar of ancient logistics, a quiet revolution in tool technology. The true power was never in the metal alone, but in the ingenious process that surrounded it. The Egyptians understood that copper was too soft to cut granite directly. So they didn't try. Instead, they used the copper as a driver for a harder substance, quartz sand. A worker would score a line on the granite with a copper saw or chisel, then pour wet sand into the groove. As they sawed back and forth, the abrasive sand particles, harder than the granite, did the actual cutting. The copper was just a vehicle, constantly wearing down and needing to be resharpened. This was a brilliant understanding of material science, turning a local resource like sand into an industrial cutting agent. It was slow, meticulous work, but it achieved a precision we can still marvel at today. The toolkit extended far beyond chisels. For the initial rough work of quarrying, the most common tool was the simple stone hammer, a durable dolerite ball gripped in the hand. To split massive blocks from the bedrock, workers employed a clever trick using wood and water. They would drill a line of holes along the desired fracture line, then drive dry wooden wedges into them. Next, they poured water over the wedges. The wood would swell with tremendous, even pressure, cleanly splitting the stone along the predetermined line. This was physics in action, a patient application of natural force. But perhaps the most critical tools were those of measurement and alignment, the instruments that ensured a block quarried 500 miles away would fit perfectly into a waiting space. The plumbob, a weighted cord, established true vertical. The sighting rod, a simple straight pole, allowed surveyors to create perfectly level foundations across vast distances. The water level, a trough of water, used the immutable property of liquid to find a level plane, even over uneven ground. These were not complex devices, but their consistent, careful use by trained craftsmen is what gave us the breathtaking precision of the pyramid's corners, aligned to the cardinal directions with an error of less than a fraction of a degree. This was not a haphazard collection of implements. It was a refined system of craft knowledge, a technology passed from master to apprentice over generations. The right tool, applied in the right sequence within a perfectly organized workflow, could achieve results that rival modern machinery. It was a testament to the power of specialized skill, where the knowledge in the artisan's hands was as valuable as the stone itself. The silent, patient work of these tools, from the splitting wedge to the guiding plumb line, translated grand logistical plans into physical reality, one precise cut and one perfectly placed stone at a time. Yet, even with the best tools and transport, a project spanning decades and continents faced one final, overarching challenge. How did you manage it all without a single written schedule or budget report? The answer lies in the original information network, a system of communication and record-keeping that wove every distant quarry and work crew into a single, conscious enterprise. The silent coordination of thousands across a continent required a system faster than any messenger. This seventh pillar of logistics was the communication web, the original nervous system that pulsed with information instead of stone. Without a single written word in many cultures, how did a master builder at Machu Picchu know that the next shipment of andesite was delayed by a landslide 3 valleys away? How did the pharaoh's overseer in Memphis communicate the exact dimensions needed to the quarry foreman in distant Aswan? The answer lies in a suite of ingenious, low-tech solutions that created a real-time or near-real-time information network. For the Inca, the primary tool was the Quipu, a complex array of knotted cords. While its full linguistic depth is still being decoded by scholars, its logistical function is clear. Using a base 10 system, different knot types, colors, and cord positions could record astonishingly detailed data. A Quipu could catalog the number of work crews dispatched from a province, the count of llamas carrying supplies, the inventory of tools at a way station, or the tally of stones extracted from a quarry that month. A trained record keeper, or Quipukamayok, could read this tactile database at a glance. More intriguingly, some researchers suggest certain Quipus may have served as mnemonic devices for conveying more complex messages, allowing standardized information to be carried by runners across the empire. And those runners were the second part of the system. The Chasquis, the legendary relay messengers, operated a postal service along the royal road that could move information at breathtaking speed. Stations were placed at intervals a fit runner could sprint, roughly every few miles. A messenger would arrive, verbally pass his memorized message or hand off a quipu to a fresh runner and rest. In this way, a directive could travel over 150 miles in a single day. It was a human-powered internet where data packets were carried in the lungs and legs of dedicated couriers. For visual, urgent signals, the Inca and many other cultures used beacon fires or smoke signals from high ridges, a simple but effective way to send pre-arranged alerts across vast distances, like signaling the safe arrival of a critical shipment or warning of a disruption on the road. In literate empires like Egypt or Mesopotamia, the system relied on scribes and a hierarchy of officials. Clay tablets in Mesopotamia and papyrus scrolls in Egypt carried detailed work orders, inventories, and ration lists. An excavated papyrus from the Great Pyramid era actually records the daily beer and bread rations for a work gang, a mundane but vital piece of logistical data. These documents created a paper trail of accountability, allowing central administrators to track the flow of materials and labor from source to site. This invisible web of knots, runners, smoke, and scrolls was what prevented the entire decades-long project from collapsing into chaos. It allowed for just-in-time delivery, where the arrival of a granite block from Aswan could be synchronized with the completion of the foundation ready to receive it. It meant a shortage of tools at the pyramid site could be communicated and remedied within weeks, not seasons. The communication system managed the most volatile element of all, human time, ensuring that the slow, patient rhythm of construction never missed a beat. With information flowing, materials moving, and workers coordinated, the final shape of the monument could begin to rise. But the ultimate goal was not just to build something big. It was to build something perfect, aligned with the heavens themselves. This pursuit of celestial precision required one final, breathtaking layer of planning, a master plan written not on papyrus but in the stars. Precision demanded more than just moving stone. It required mastering the flow of time itself. This brings us to the eighth pillar of ancient logistics, a concept so modern it feels out of place in the distant past: the strategic use of storage and buffer systems. Imagine the chaos if a shipment of 100-ton granite beams arrived at the pyramid site on the same day. The crew was still laying the foundation courses below. Without a place to put them, these priceless blocks would become immovable obstacles, clogging the carefully orchestrated work site. Ancient planners understood this danger intimately. They didn't just build for the moment, they built for the entire decade-long sequence of construction. Near major sites, archaeologists have uncovered what can only be described as ancient stone parking lots. Vast, leveled areas where quarried blocks were staged, sorted by size and quality, and held in readiness. At the Giza Plateau, for instance, researchers have identified extensive yards to the east of the Great Pyramid where stones awaited their turn in the construction queue. This wasn't a random dump, it was a meticulously organized inventory. Blocks were positioned along prepared pathways, oriented for the most efficient retrieval when the master schedule called for them. This system created a crucial buffer between the unpredictable journey from the quarry and the relentless, daily demands of the building site. A delay of weeks on the river, a seasonal storm that halted land transport, none of these could be allowed to stop the work. The buffer stock of stones on site acted as a shock absorber for the entire supply chain. It ensured that the masons and setters never ran out of material. They could work continuously, day after day, because the planners had anticipated the hiccups and built in a cushion. This practice reveals a profound understanding of supply chain fluidity. They weren't just reacting to problems, they were designing systems to prevent them. Think of it as ancient just-in-time inventory, but with a much longer and more forgiving timeline. The just-in-time wasn't hours or days, it might be months or even a season. The quarry teams worked years ahead, filling the storage yards so that the construction crews would always have what they needed, right when they needed it. This logistical foresight extended beyond stone. Those massive worker settlements we discussed also functioned as storage hubs for the lifeblood of the project, food and tools. The large granaries and warehouses found there weren't just for daily distribution, they held reserves. A poor harvest in one province, a delayed grain barge, these setbacks could be weathered because the central site held surplus. This principle of the buffer, of planning for the unpredictable, shows a cognitive leap. It's the recognition that a perfect plan on paper will always meet a messy, imperfect reality. The true skill lay in building flexibility into the system itself. By creating these physical reservoirs of material and supplies, ancient managers guaranteed something priceless: continuous momentum. The rhythm of construction never had to pause, the collective focus never had to break. This mastery of material flow was ultimately about controlling the one resource even they couldn't create more of: time. And to wield time so effectively, they needed a grander schedule, one written not on any papyrus but across the night sky itself. The rhythm of the river dictated the rhythm of the work. For the ancient Egyptians, time was not a straight line on a calendar. It was a great, repeating cycle woven into the fabric of the world, and the master builders learned to dance to its tempo. This ninth pillar of logistics was the art of temporal engineering, a deep synchronization of human ambition with the immutable patterns of nature. They didn't just build in time, they built with time, turning seasons and stars into tools as vital as any chisel or sledge. The entire economy of the kingdom pulsed to the beat of the Nile's annual flood. When the waters rose, covering the fields in fertile silt, farming came to a halt. For 3 to 4 months, a vast portion of the population was suddenly freed from agricultural labor. This was not a period of idleness, it was a state-managed opportunity. The seasonal inundation created a natural, renewable labor pool, a workforce of thousands available for national projects. It was logistics written into the ecosystem itself, a brilliant solution to mobilizing a pre-industrial society without crippling its food supply. But the flood did more than provide workers, it reshaped the very landscape for transport. The higher water levels brought the river's channels closer to the desert plateau building sites. More importantly, the wet season transformed the ground. The idea of dragging a 200-ton block across dry, loose sand is a nightmare of friction. But drag that same sledge over dampened sand, as modern experiments have shown, and the required pulling force plummets. The moisture creates a firm, almost slippery surface, a temporary highway crafted by the climate itself. The most monumental hauls, therefore, were almost certainly timed for this window, when nature lent a helping hand to ease the burden. How did they know the precise moment to begin? Their calendar was written in the heavens. The most critical celestial event was the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, which appeared just before dawn in mid-July. This astronomical sign, which the Egyptians called Soptet, coincided almost perfectly with the beginning of the annual inundation. It was their celestial starting gun. When the priests observed Sirius glittering on the horizon at sunrise, the signal went out across the kingdom. The flood was coming, the transport season was open, and the great logistical machine could shift into its highest gear. This was chrono-logistics, the meticulous planning of every phase of work within these natural and cultural windows. Quarrying might be a year-round activity in the deep south, but the movement of the largest pieces was reserved for the flood. The finishing work of precise carving and placement could continue during the drier months. Even the religious festivals were woven into this schedule, providing spiritual motivation and communal breaks that maintained morale across the decades-long project. This integration reveals a world view where human enterprise was not separate from the cosmos, but a conscious part of its order. They weren't fighting against time and tide, they were partnering with them, using an intimate knowledge of environmental patterns to achieve what sheer force alone never could. It was a breathtaking display of foresight, where the blueprint had to account not just for space and weight, but for the turning of the seasons and the dance of the stars. This level of coordination points to a final, foundational element, the intellectual architecture that made such foresight possible. What kind of mind could hold a plan this vast, spanning not just miles but generations? The master plan existed long before the first chisels struck stone. This 10th pillar of ancient logistics was the most critical of all. The blueprint held not in papyrus, but in the mind of a master architect, and then translated into a physical guide for thousands. It was the realm of conceptual logistics, where the entire monument was built in miniature and in mathematics before a single worker arrived at the site. How do you communicate a vision for a structure that will take decades to complete, to people who will never see it finished? The answer lies in a toolkit of models, diagrams, and physical markers that turned abstract genius into executable instruction. Near the foundations of Mesopotamian ziggurats, archaeologists have discovered small, carefully made clay models. These were not toys or religious idols, but scaled-down architectural prototypes. A master builder could use such a model to show a foreman the precise proportions of a terrace, the intended slope of a stairway, or the layout of a temple on the summit. It was a three-dimensional contract, a shared reference point that ensured everyone, from the quarryman to the bricklayer, was contributing to the same final form. In Egypt, the process was even more direct and breathtaking in its simplicity. To lay out the perfectly square base of a pyramid, spanning over 13 acres with sides aligned to true north, engineers used little more than ropes, stakes, and an intimate knowledge of the stars. They would first establish a true north-south line by observing the circumpolar stars, those that never set. Using a simple sighting instrument called a merkhit, they could track a star's path and mark its endpoints on the ground, creating a precise meridian line. From this baseline, they used the principles of geometry, likely the 3-4-5 triangle method, to create perfect right angles, to stake out the four corners of the massive base. These stakes and taut ropes were the first physical manifestation of the pyramid, a ghostly outline on the desert floor that contained the entire project's destiny within its geometry. This conceptual phase was where the deepest logistical calculations happened. Before ordering a single block from a swan, the chief architect had to estimate the total volume of stone required, down to a startling degree of accuracy. They needed to sequence the construction stages, knowing that the inner chambers and passageways had to be built and sealed off as the pyramid rose around them, a puzzle assembled from the inside out. Most importantly, they had to plan the material flow. How many blocks would be needed for the first 10 courses? How does the required stone volume decrease as you approach the apex? This planning dictated the pace of quarrying, the schedule of river transport during the inundation, and the size of the storage yards on site. It was a cognitive map that guided decades of physical labor. This level of abstract planning represents a monumental leap in human thought. It is the power to hold a complex, multi-generational project in your mind, to break it down into thousands of sequential tasks, and to devise a system where each task dovetails into the next. The master plan was a testament to long-term strategic thinking in a world we often assume lived hand to mouth. It required a vision that could transcend a single human lifetime, a commitment to a future outcome so distant that the person who drew the first line in the sand would never witness its completion. This faith in a plan and the social continuity to see it through may be the most profound logistics of all. It raises a final, haunting question about these vanished systems. We have traced their physical components from quarry to capstone, but what was the ultimate fuel for this machine? What belief or necessity was powerful enough to sustain such an immense, coordinated effort across a continent and across generations? The true cost of a pyramid was measured not in stone but in bread. For every worker hauling a 2-ton block, their body was a biological engine, burning through thousands of calories each day under the desert sun. This 11th pillar of logistics was the most relentless of all, the energy supply chain. It transformed entire landscapes into fuel for human labor, demanding a constant, colossal influx of food and resources just to keep the machine running. A workforce of 20,000, each requiring over 3,000 calories daily, meant provisioning a small city every single day for decades. This was a logistical puzzle on a national scale, one that stretched far beyond the construction site and deep into the agricultural heartlands of the empire. For the pharaohs, the fertile fields of the Nile Delta became the engine room of the pyramids, but this was not a simple matter of collecting surplus. It was a state-managed system of taxation, storage, and redistribution, orchestrated with military precision. Grain, primarily barley and emmer wheat, was collected as a tax from provinces across Egypt. This grain was then shipped north on the Nile by the barge load to vast, state-run granaries near the plateau. At Giza, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of massive, communal bakeries, with rows of clay bread molds capable of producing tens of thousands of loaves daily. Nearby, vats for brewing beer, a nutritious and safe staple drink, have been found. The diet was supplemented with fish from the Nile, salted for preservation, and occasional meat from cattle herds also maintained by the state. This system turned agricultural abundance into sustained human power, a direct conversion of sunlight and river silt into physical momentum. Centuries later and a continent away, the Roman Empire perfected this model on an even more staggering scale. To feed the city of Rome with its million inhabitants and its endless public works like the Colosseum, the empire created a maritime supply chain that was the ancient world's equivalent of a global superhighway. The saying, "bread and circuses," was built on a literal fleet. Every year, a vast armada of grain ships, the Annona fleet, made the dangerous journey from the bread baskets of Egypt and North Africa to the port of Ostia. The grain was unloaded, stored in immense warehouses called horia, and then distributed to the citizenry. This system wasn't just about preventing hunger. It was about fueling the urban workforce that built Rome's monuments and maintained its empire. The labor that stacked the stones of the Colosseum was powered by wheat grown along the Nile. In the Americas, without large draft animals or expansive river networks for bulk transport, the solution was more localized but no less ingenious. The Inca sustained their monumental projects and their road network runners through a decentralized system of agricultural terraces. They sculpted mountainsides into stepped farms, creating microclimates and preventing soil erosion. Staple crops like maize, potatoes, and quinoa were grown in these terraces, with surplus stored in the network of waystations or tambos that dotted the royal road. This meant a work crew or a messenger could be fed from local reserves, reducing the need to transport food over vast distances. The supply chain was woven directly into the landscape itself. Yet food was only half of the energy equation. The other half was fire. Consider the invisible consumption behind the scenes. Cooking that mountain of grain required fuel. Forging and sharpening the countless copper chisels required charcoal-fired furnaces. In places like Rome, making the lime mortar that held buildings together demanded kilns burning at intense heat for days. This need for thermal energy created a secondary, voracious supply chain for wood and charcoal. Entire forests were managed, not just cleared, as a renewable resource. Coppicing, the practice of repeatedly cutting trees back to their stumps to encourage fast regrowth of straight poles, was a common form of ancient forestry. This provided a steady supply of wood for charcoal production. The demand was so immense that it could reshape regional ecology and drive trade, with shipments of timber or charcoal becoming as critical as shipments of stone. This support network was the most vulnerable part of any project. A single poor harvest, a plague in the grain fields, or a disruption in the charcoal supply could bring everything to a halt far faster than a quarry delay. It was a constant, precarious balancing act between consumption and production, a reminder that these stone wonders ultimately rested on a foundation of living, renewable systems. The true monument was sustained by the silent, endless work of farmers, foresters, bakers, and brewers, whose daily labor converted the Earth's bounty into the energy that built empires. That energy, however, was useless without precise direction. 1,000 strong arms could pull a stone, but only a master's mind knew exactly where it should go. This 12th pillar of logistics was the human library, the guilds of specialized craftsmen who carried not stone, but the irreplaceable knowledge of how to shape it. Construction was not a monolithic task for a uniform mass of workers. It was a symphony of highly skilled roles, each with its own guarded secrets and empirical wisdom. These were the true carriers of the logistical plan, the ones who could translate a grand design into flawless physical reality. In Egypt, the distinction was stark. While seasonal crews provided the raw muscle, the permanent core of the operation was an elite class of artisans. The master stone cutters, the sculptors, the men who set the casing stones with hairline precision. These were not laborers. They were highly paid, respected professionals, often buried with honors near the monuments they helped build. Their knowledge was a form of intellectual property, passed from father to son or master to apprentice over generations. They knew, for instance, that a specific granite from Aswan had a subtle grain, and how to cut with it to avoid shattering. They possessed the tactile memory for achieving a perfectly flat surface using only simple copper tools and abrasive sand. This was not written down in manuals, it was stored in the muscles and instincts of trained hands. This model of specialized guilds was a global phenomenon. In the Roman world, the architect was not just a designer but a master builder and engineer. Vitruvius, whose writings survive, outlines a vast curriculum for such a person, encompassing geometry, astronomy, acoustics, and machinery. A Roman architectus was expected to understand everything from sourcing water, resistant concrete, to calculating the load-bearing capacity of an arch. He was a project manager, a materials scientist, and a logistics coordinator rolled into one. These experts were sometimes itinerant, traveling from province to oversee major imperial projects, bringing standardized techniques and innovations with them. This mobility of knowledge was crucial. It meant that a clever solution invented while building an aqueduct in Gaul could be applied to a bridge in Syria, creating a cumulative engineering tradition that spanned the empire. Perhaps the most fascinating example comes from Mesoamerica, where the absence of draft animals and metal tools made expertise even more critical. Among the Maya, there were likely specialists known as hoistadors, experts in the art of lifting and positioning massive stones using only levers, ropes, and earthen ramps. Their skill was not in brute strength, but in an intuitive, collective understanding of physics and teamwork. They knew the exact placement of a log roller to pivot a 10-ton block, the precise rhythm of pull needed from a team of 50 to inch it forward, and the way to use gravity and temporary cribbing to lower a lintel stone gently onto two waiting pillars. This knowledge was empirical, learned through trial, error, and observation over centuries. It was a living, breathing science preserved and refined within specific families or community groups. These guilds functioned as the project's nervous system. The logistical planners could chart a course for a stone from quarry to site, but only the master cutter could transform that rough block into a perfect geometric form. The architects could draw the grand plan, but only the hoistadors could make it stand up. This division of labor created a powerful efficiency. It allowed the vast workforce to be directed with purpose, with each specialized group focusing on the task they had spent a lifetime mastering. The system ensured that the most complex, delicate operations were performed by those with the deepest tacit knowledge, preventing catastrophic errors that could set back construction by years. In this way, the guilds were more than just laborers. They were the guardians of a civilization's technical soul. They were a living library, their minds and hands holding the accumulated engineering wisdom of their ancestors, ready to apply it to the next impossible project. This transmission of skill across generations points to the ultimate purpose behind such immense effort. It was not just about building a tomb or a temple. It was about forging an eternal legacy, a statement in stone meant to outlast empires and speak across millennia. A single word from a divine king could redirect the flow of an entire civilization. The 13th and perhaps most formidable pillar of ancient logistics was not a tool or a road, but an idea, the unshakable political and religious will that provided the ultimate mandate. No megaproject spanning continents and generations could ever begin without a central authority powerful enough to command the very fabric of society. This was the force that turned the collective action problem, the challenge of coordinating thousands of individuals toward a single, long-term goal, into a societal imperative. It provided the legal and spiritual framework that made every other logistical pillar possible. In Egypt, the pharaoh was not merely a ruler, he was a living god, the earthly embodiment of the divine order known as Maat. His monumental tomb was not a personal vanity but a cosmic necessity, a machine to ensure the harmony of the universe and the continued fertility of the Nile. This belief transformed a construction project into a sacred duty. When the royal decree went out to a nome, a regional district, demanding a quota of laborers or a shipment of grain, it was not an economic transaction. It was an order from a deity woven into the spiritual and social contract of the kingdom. Compliance was both a civic obligation and a religious act, a way for a community to participate in maintaining cosmic balance. This divine authority is what allowed planners to seamlessly integrate the seasonal labor of farmers during the flood, redirecting the energy of an entire agricultural society into a national project without causing collapse. Half a world away, the Inca solved the same problem through a different but equally powerful system of imperial obligation, the mita. This was a labor tax, a rotational service owed to the state. Every household across the vast, mountainous empire was required to contribute a period of work each year on state projects, which could include building roads, maintaining terraces, or working on monumental construction. The genius of the mita was its enforceability across a realm of incredible geographic and cultural diversity. A community in what is now Ecuador knew it owed labor for a project in distant Cusco. This was possible because the Inca state, the Tawantinsuyu, was not just a political entity, it was a totalizing system. It provided security, infrastructure, and in return, it demanded this service. The state stored the surplus food and supplies in its Tambo way stations precisely to support these rotating labor crews as they fulfilled their duty. This top-down mandate was the ultimate permission slip. It granted logistical planners the authority to draw upon almost limitless human resources, to commandeer materials from distant lands, and to expect obedience from officials hundreds of miles away. It solved the why that powered the how. Why would a farmer leave his field to drag stone? Why would a porter carry goods for weeks along a dangerous road? The answer lay in a combination of belief, duty, and the sheer organizational power of the state. This force of societal organization created a temporary but incredibly focused unity of purpose. It could align the diverse rhythms of countless villages and regions into the single, slow heartbeat of a rising pyramid or a stretching royal road. The mandate turned the abstract blueprint in the master architect's mind into a shared national narrative, one powerful enough to outlast any single individual and build for a future its builders would never see. That intimate knowledge of the landscape was a form of power. Before a single stone could be moved, the terrain itself had to be understood, not as an obstacle, but as a partner in the grand design. This 14th pillar of logistics was geographic intelligence, a deep, empirical mapping of the world that turned every hill, river, and forest into a calculated component of the plan. Ancient engineers were master surveyors of the possible. their first task was always to answer a simple-sounding question with profound implications. What is the best path from here to there? The answer was never a straight line on a flat map. It was a three-dimensional puzzle of soil stability, seasonal water levels, and available materials. To move a 200-ton obelisk from a quarry to the Nile, Egyptian planners would have assessed the desert corridor with a practiced eye. They needed firm, level ground that could support unimaginable weight without collapsing. They likely used simple but effective techniques to test the soil, observing how it drained after rare rains or probing it with rods to find bedrock. But their intelligence gathering extended beyond the dirt underfoot. For the critical river journey, understanding the wind was everything. How do you ensure a heavily laden barge can be guided and not simply blown off course? Historians suggest they may have used smoke from small fires to visually gauge wind patterns and consistency along the river at different times of day, identifying the most reliable stretches for sailing or the calmest areas for using oars and poles. This was meteorology in action, using observation to predict and harness natural forces. This empirical knowledge was often translated into physical models. While we have no surviving ancient topographical maps as we know them, the concept of modeling terrain was certainly within their grasp. The Inca, masters of mountain engineering, almost certainly used small-scale models made of clay or stone to plan the gradients of their roads and the placement of terraces. A model allowed a planner to visualize a slope, to see where a switchback would be necessary to ease the ascent, or to identify a narrow ridge that could be widened into a stable roadway. It was a way to test the route in miniature, to work out problems of geometry and physics before committing thousands of workers to a dead end. This environmental intelligence was also a vast, living catalogue of resources. A master builder didn't just know where the granite was, he knew where to find the perfect clay for mortar, a blend that would set hard and endure for millennia. He knew which forests, often at great distance, produced the long, straight, resilient trees needed for the massive sledges and rollers. He knew the locations of gypsum deposits for plaster, or sources of ochre and other minerals for pigments. This catalogue was compiled over generations, a cumulative database held in the memory of craftsmen and officials, passed down as essential trade knowledge. It meant that when a project began, the planners weren't starting from scratch. They were consulting a deep, communal memory of the land's offerings. This allowed them to design logistics that worked in concert with the landscape. They didn't just build a road over a mountain, they found the mountain's weakest ridge or most gradual slope. They didn't fight a river's current, they used its annual flood as a lifting mechanism. By aligning their efforts with the grain of the natural world, they minimized wasted effort and maximized the efficiency of every pull, every roll, every journey. This profound connection to place was their ultimate strategic advantage, turning the entire continent into a familiar workshop. Yet, even with the perfect route and all the right materials, the human element remained the most unpredictable of all. How did they maintain the spirit of a workforce engaged in a task that would outlive them all? A flawless stone could be betrayed by a hidden flaw in the earth. The silent evidence of ancient ambition is not found only in towering successes, but in the frozen moments where the grand logistical machine ground to a halt. These failures are not mere footnotes, they are archaeological gold, offering a raw and honest look at the stress points in systems we otherwise only see in their perfected state. They reveal the breathtakingly fine margins within which these ancient project managers operated. Perhaps the most famous example is the unfinished obelisk, still lying in its granite bed in the Aswan quarries. It is a monument to a plan interrupted, a single crack discovered deep within the stone during the final stages of undercutting. That flaw, invisible until the moment of truth, rendered the entire monolith, over 100 feet long and weighing more than 1,000 tons, useless. The workers simply walked away, leaving their tools in place. This snapshot tells us everything about the risks they faced. It underscores why the sounding technique of tapping for a clear ring was so critical, and it shows the absolute limit of their material science. Once a crack propagated, there was no repair, only abandonment. The economic and human cost of that failure was immense, a sobering reminder that for all their planning, nature held the final veto. Abandoned projects dot the archaeological landscape like ghostly echoes. In Egypt, there are pyramid sites where construction began with great fanfare, only to be scaled down dramatically or left as a rubble core. Sometimes the cause was a sudden shift in political will, the death of a pharaoh, but in other cases the clues point to logistical overreach. A pyramid started on unstable ground might show signs of subsidence, forcing engineers to change angles or reduce height. A quarry might prove unable to produce blocks of the required size consistently, forcing a switch to smaller, less impressive stone. Each of these sites is a crime scene of sorts, where investigators can piece together what went wrong. Was the supply chain for food and tools too fragile, leading to worker shortages? Did the transport route for the heaviest stones prove impassable, creating an impossible bottleneck? These abandoned efforts teach us that success was never guaranteed. They highlight the immense pressure on the planners to get every single variable right, from geology to meteorology to human endurance. Sometimes the failure was not in the plan, but in the execution of a known technique pushed beyond its limit. Consider the Roman arch, an engineering marvel that distributed weight beautifully. Yet, Roman ruins also contain collapsed arches and vaults. Analysis of these often points to subtle miscalculations. Perhaps the mortar mix was slightly off, curing weaker than expected. Maybe the foundation settled unevenly over time due to unseen groundwater, or possibly the centering, the temporary wooden framework that held the stones until the keystone was placed, was removed too soon. Each collapse was a brutal lesson in physics and material behavior, a lesson that would be incorporated into the guild knowledge of the next generation of builders. These breakdowns show us where the boundary of empirical knowledge lay. They worked with safety factors learned from trial and tragic error, not from mathematical formulas. A successful arch stood because someone, somewhere, had seen one fall and understood why. Studying these fractures in the system ultimately deepens our awe for the successes. Every completed pyramid, every standing colossus, represents 1,000 potential disasters avoided. It means the sounding was perfect, the route was viable, the labor was sustained, the mortar cured correctly, and the political will held firm for decades. The failures illuminate the incredible complexity that was being managed, showing us that these were not infallible systems, but human endeavors operating at the very edge of possibility. They worked within tolerances so slim that a single hidden crack in a quarry, a single season of poor harvests, or a single misaligned foundation stone could alter history. This realization makes their achievements not less but more human and infinitely more impressive. It begs a final, reflective question as we look at these silent, enduring forms. We have traced the physical and organizational systems, but what was the ultimate purpose of this immense generational effort? What world you could possibly justify such an investment of a civilization's entire energy? The sheer weight of the stone demanded a new kind of conversation with gravity. While ramps provided a steady, sloping path upward, the final act of positioning a block with hairline precision required something more elegant, more controlled. This 16th pillar of logistics was the realm of intermediate technologies, the clever machines that transformed raw human effort into finely tuned mechanical advantage. These were not engines in our sense, but brilliant adaptations of simple physics, each one a specialized answer to a specific problem on the crowded, chaotic construction site. The iconic earthen ramp leading to a pyramid's peak represents just one broad solution, a massive investment in landscape itself to create a continuous road. But for more delicate maneuvers, ancient engineers deployed a fascinating arsenal of devices. In Egypt, alongside the great ramps, workers likely used a simple but vital tool called the shadaf. This was a long pole balanced on a crossbeam, with a weight on one end and a bucket or rope on the other. While primarily used for irrigation, its principle of counterbalance made it perfect for lifting smaller stone blocks or heavy containers of mortar to higher working levels with minimal strain. It was a portable lever system, a basic crane that could be operated by a single person, bringing essential materials up the ever-growing face of the monument. Centuries later, the Romans would refine this idea into a true mechanical workhorse, the treadwheel crane. Powered not by a single worker but by several men walking inside a large, wooden wheel, this device used a system of gears and a winding drum to create tremendous lifting power. It allowed a small team to hoist multi-ton stones straight up a building's side, revolutionizing urban construction in crowded city spaces where massive ramps were impossible. The genius lay in its gear ratio, which turned the slow, steady pace of walking men into a powerful, controlled pull on the rope. This was no longer just muscle, it was muscle multiplied by clever engineering. But perhaps the most subtle technologies were those of positioning. Before a block could be lifted, it often had to be turned, nudged, or angled. Here, the lever and the pivot were kings. A long timber placed under a stone's edge, with a rock as a fulcrum, could give a team of workers the power to tilt a colossal weight by inches. By using a series of such levers and inserting wooden or stone cribbing to hold each small gain, they could walk a block sideways or rotate it into perfect alignment. This was a dance of micro-adjustments, a testament to patience and an intuitive grasp of balance. The deployment of these tools on site was its own logistical puzzle, a micromanagement of space and sequence. A treadwheel crane required a stable, level platform and clear space for its operators. Levers and rollers needed to be stored close at hand but out of the way of the main hauling paths. The placement of a single pivot point had to be calculated, as a mistake could send a block tipping uncontrollably. This was the granular detail of the plan, where the master builder's vision met the foreman's daily choreography of men and machines. Each technology served as a force multiplier, but more importantly, as a control mechanism. They allowed for finesse in a process defined by immense scale, proving that the ancient builder's mind was always seeking not just power, but precision. 1,000 tons of stone could be accounted for with a single mark in wet clay. The 17th pillar of ancient logistics was not built of granite or timber, but of information itself, a vast and meticulous bureaucracy that gave memory to the machine. In the bustling cities of Mesopotamia, the true engine of construction hummed quietly in administrative offices where scribes pressed styluses into soft clay. Thousands of these cuneiform tablets survive, not recording epic poetry, but the mundane, vital details of daily operations. One tablet might list the barley rations for a crew of 20 workers for a month. Another details a shipment of bitumen, a natural tar used for waterproofing, arriving from a distant source. Yet another assigns specific oxen teams to haul sledges on a particular day of the festival. This was an early administrative state in full, relentless action. Every resource from a bushel of grain to a day of labor was logged, tracked, and tallied. This system created accountability. A foreman could not claim he needed more workers unless his previous crew's output was recorded as insufficient. A warehouse official was responsible for every tool checked out and every sack of flour stored. This bureaucracy, often caricatured as red tape, was in fact the project's central nervous system. It allowed planners to forecast needs. By analyzing records from previous years, they could predict how much stone would be quarried in a season, how much food would be consumed by a summer workforce, and how many barges would be required for the inundation transport. Most importantly, it enabled dynamic redistribution. If a plague affected cattle in one province, records would show a shortfall in leather for ropes, and officials could order extra shipments from another region. If a work gang finished a ramp section ahead of schedule, the central administration could reassign them to a different task without losing a day. The Egyptian system operated with similar precision. Scribes stationed at the pyramid site, at the quarries, and on the docks kept parallel records on papyrus. They tracked the provenance of each major block, noting the quarry and even the work gang that extracted it. They logged the daily issuance of tools, knowing that a dull copper chisel needed to be returned for sharpening. They recorded the sick days and the injury reports, because a missing worker meant a recalculation of the day's pulling teams. This constant flow of data turned the chaotic, sprawling reality of a continent-spanning project into a manageable model. It was a cognitive system overlaid on the physical one. The clay tablet and the papyrus scroll were tools as essential as the lever or the sledge, because they managed the most volatile resource of all, information. Without this written memory, plans would dissolve into hearsay, supplies would vanish into the desert, and the delicate synchronization of thousands would collapse. The bureaucracy was the ledger of a civilization's ambition, the proof that they understood a profound truth. To move a mountain, you must first be able to count every stone. A society's greatest monument could only be built by its most willing participants. The 18th pillar of logistics was perhaps the most human of all, a system of cultural and psychological motivators that transformed exhausting labor into meaningful participation. While the power of the state provided the mandate and rations provided the energy, something deeper was required to sustain a person's spirit across years of backbreaking work. The evidence suggests that beyond any system of coercion, ancient societies mastered the art of motivating the heart and mind. For many, contributing to a pharaoh's pyramid or an Inca temple was not merely a duty, it was a profound religious act. In Egypt, the pharaoh was the living link to the gods, and his successful journey to the afterlife was believed to ensure the continued fertility of the Nile and the stability of the cosmos. By hauling a stone for his tomb, a worker was participating in a ritual that secured the future of his entire community and his own place within the cosmic order. This was labor as liturgy, each pull of the rope a prayer in physical form. This spiritual incentive was reinforced by tangible social rewards. Skilled artisans and foremen could earn prestigious titles, better rations, and even a coveted burial plot in the shadow of the monument they helped create. These were not just graves, they were eternal badges of honor, allowing an individual to share in the immortality of the structure. For the seasonal laborer returning to his village after a 3-month rotation, he carried not just calloused hands but a story. He had been part of something immense, something that would awe his children and grandchildren. This fostered a powerful sense of community pride and shared identity that transcended individual fatigue. The logistical calendar itself was woven with psychological relief valves. Major religious festivals were scheduled into the work year. These were not days off in our modern sense, but days of communal celebration, ritual feasting, and ceremonial recognition. The state provided extra food, music, and a collective pause. These events broke the monotony of labor, reaffirmed the sacred purpose of the work, and rebuilt morale. They were a masterstroke of human resource management, understanding that a workforce is not a machine, but a community that needs renewal. In the Andes, the Mita labor tax was framed within a system of reciprocal obligation. By giving their labor to the state, communities received security, access to well-maintained roads, and the right to store their own surplus in state facilities. It was a social contract, creating a sense of mutual investment rather than simple extraction. This psychological framework had a direct impact on the very design of the structures. If workers felt a genuine connection to the project, they were more likely to take care to ensure precise fitting, to report a flawed stone. A workforce motivated by devotion and pride builds differently than one driven solely by fear. The care in the hidden, unseen corners of these monuments, places only the builders would ever know, speaks to this personal investment. Understanding these soft factors completes our picture. It shows us that the ultimate logistical challenge was not just moving stone, but moving human spirit. The most resilient supply chain was the one that carried meaning from the center of power to the most remote work crew, convincing them that their sweat was not just building a wall, but was weaving their own story into the eternal fabric of their civilization. This deep, generational commitment points toward a final, haunting reality. These projects were designed to outlast not just the workers, but the very empires that built them. The true test of any system comes not when the plan works, but when it breaks. A hidden crack in the quarry, a river that failed to flood, a mountain pass blocked by landslide. These were the moments that separated a rigid blueprint from a truly resilient logistical network. This 19th pillar was the capacity for adaptation and innovation under duress, the dynamic, problem-solving intelligence that allowed these monumental projects to absorb shocks and evolve. The systems we have traced were not static, they were living processes constantly refined by the pressure of the impossible. Consider the enigma of Stonehenge. Its largest sarsen stones were dragged from local quarries, a feat of organization in itself, but the smaller, distinctive bluestones tell a far more audacious story. Geological analysis confirms they originated in the Preseli Hills of Wales, over 150 miles away. The straight-line distance is staggering, but the actual journey across the varied and challenging terrain of prehistoric Britain seems almost mythical. How did a Neolithic community without metal tools or the wheel accomplish this? The prevailing theory is a masterpiece of adaptive logistics, a hybrid solution that used every available advantage. Researchers suggest the stones were first moved overland to the headwaters of rivers like the Avon. There, they could have been loaded onto rafts or lashed between canoes for a water-borne journey along the coast and upriver, using the tides and currents to bear the weight. For the final overland leg to Salisbury Plain, they likely employed a combination of wooden sledges, rollers, and earthen trackways built across boggy ground. This was not a single method but a chain of methods, each chosen to suit a specific segment of geography. It was logistics as a toolkit, adapting the means to the terrain. Centuries later, the Romans faced a different kind of logistical bottleneck, one of time and skilled labor. Carving, transporting, and fitting millions of heavy stone blocks for harbors, aqueducts, and amphitheaters was a slow, labor-intensive process. Their revolutionary response was not a better way to move stone, but a new material that could be moved as a liquid. Opus cementitium, Roman concrete, was a logistical game-changer. Its key ingredient was a volcanic ash called pozzolana, which, when mixed with lime and rubble, created a paste that could be poured into wooden forms and would set even underwater. Think of the implications. Instead of coordinating the quarrying, shaping, and precise placement of countless irregular stones, builders could now mix ingredients from local sources, transport them in sacks and barrels, and pour vast monolithic structures. A harbor wall could be formed directly in the sea, an aqueduct channel could be cast in a continuous run, a dome could be built without a mountain of supporting masonry. This innovation simplified the supply chain dramatically. It shifted the demand from a scarce resource, perfect stone, to more abundant, mixable components. It reduced the need for supremely skilled stonecutters at the site, allowing more work to be done by general laborers. It was an innovation born from the pressure to build faster, stronger, and across an ever-expanding empire, a material solution to a logistical problem. These stories reveal a critical truth. The hidden systems were not just about execution, they were about learning. A failed attempt to drag a stone across a particular type of soil would lead to the invention of a better sledge runner. The collapse of an earth ramp under a record-breaking load would teach a new formula for its slope and composition. This knowledge was not lost, it was accumulated, becoming part of the oral tradition of the guilds or the written records of the scribes. Each obstacle forced a refinement, turning setbacks into stepping stones. This adaptive ingenuity was the lifeblood of the entire endeavor, proving that the greatest resource was not in the quarry or the granary, but in the flexible, inventive human mind confronting a challenge. This relentless drive to solve the unsolvable, to find a way where none seemed to exist, is what allowed these stone dreams to rise from the drawing in the sand to a permanent mark on the skyline. It forces us to look at these silent structures not as finished artifacts, but as the frozen evidence of 1,000 solved problems, a conversation between humanity and an unyielding world where every innovation whispered, "Try again." The path carved for one stone could guide 1,000 more. These monumental projects were never truly finished, not in the way we think. When the last capstone was set and the final polish applied, something far more valuable than the monument itself remained behind. A quarry was now a permanent industrial site, its access roads worn deep and smooth. A workforce had been trained, its guilds now holding refined knowledge. A bureaucracy had been perfected, its clay tablets and papyrus scrolls detailing a proven system. This was the 20th pillar, the legacy network, where one megaproject became the fertile ground from which the next would inevitably grow. The logistical infrastructure created for a single wonder lowered the barrier for every construction that followed, creating a powerful positive feedback loop of capability for an entire civilization. Consider the Roman Empire. Its legendary road network, the Cursus Publicus, was originally engineered for a brutally practical purpose, moving legions and military supplies at speed to secure the frontiers. These were highways built to last with deep stone foundations, efficient drainage, and way stations. But once this network existed, it became a gift to the future. Centuries later, when the Emperor Hadrian desired to rebuild the Pantheon with its majestic, coffered concrete dome, the logistical challenge of materials was vastly simplified. The beautiful marbles for its interior, Pavanazetto from Turkey, Giallo Antico from Tunisia, and Porphyry from Egypt, did not have to pioneer a new path. They traveled along the very roads the legions had marched, using the rest houses and harbors the military had established. The network built for conquest now served the arts of peace, transporting beauty instead of soldiers. This legacy effect transformed construction from a series of isolated miracles into a cumulative tradition. In Egypt, the quarries at Aswan, the worker settlements at Giza, and the administrative practices of the Old Kingdom did not vanish with the completion of the Great Pyramid. They became institutional knowledge. When a later pharaoh from the Middle Kingdom embarked on his own building project, he inherited not just the ambition, but the tools, the maps, and the experienced foremen. The learning curve had already been climbed. The painful trial and error of moving the first obelisk had been translated into a reliable manual of technique. This is how civilizations build momentum. The Inca Royal Road, the Quipu Nyan, is perhaps the ultimate example. It was not built for a single temple or palace, but as the permanent circulatory system of the empire itself. Once completed, it made every subsequent administrative act, every economic exchange, and every new construction project immeasurably easier. A new provincial center could be supplied because the road was already there. A new terrace system could be built because the engineers who maintained the road's bridges were available. The initial, immense investment paid dividends for generations, turning the impossible into the routine. This legacy network created a form of logistical capital. It was a stored repository of solved problems, ready to be withdrawn for the next grand vision. The master builders of the past were not just constructing monuments, they were constructing the very capacity for their civilization to dream bigger next time. They left behind a world that was easier to move through, easier to organize, and richer in skilled hands. This silent inheritance, the roads, the quarries, the guilds, and the filing systems, may be their most profound and enduring gift, the unseen foundation upon which history itself continued to build. The shadow of a pyramid stretched far beyond its stone walls. Each monumental structure we have traced was not merely built from the environment, it was carved directly out of it, leaving a profound and lasting signature on the land. This 21st pillar of logistics forces us to confront a complex reality: the immense environmental footprint of these ancient ambitions. The scale of resource extraction was continental, and its marks are still visible today. The quarries at Aswan are vast, open wounds in the earth, some trenches large enough to hold modern buildings. To move the stone, forests were felled on an industrial scale, not just for the massive sledges and rollers, but for the endless fires needed to produce charcoal for metalworking and lime production. Soils were compacted by countless feet and heavy loads, and delicate ecosystems along transport routes were inevitably altered. This was a wholesale reshaping of the landscape in service of a single, concentrated goal. The ecological cost was a direct and often devastating line item in the logistical ledger. Yet, within this narrative of consumption, a more nuanced story emerges from the archaeological record, one of surprising foresight and pragmatic management. These societies were not blind to the limits of their world, they were intimately dependent on them. This relationship fostered practices we might recognize as early forms of sustainability, born not from modern ethics but from stark necessity. In Rome, the insatiable demand for wood led not only to deforestation but also to the development of managed woodlots. The practice of coppicing, cutting trees back to their stumps to encourage fast, straight regrowth, ensured a renewable supply of poles for construction and fuel. It was a calculated investment in a future supply chain. Similarly, the reuse of materials speaks to a practical conservation of effort. Across the ancient world, it was common practice to cannibalize older, sometimes ruined, monuments for new projects. Pharaonic temples were dismantled to build medieval fortresses, Roman marble facades were burned to make lime for new walls, and Inca stones were repurposed for colonial churches. This was not vandalism in the modern sense. It was often a logistical decision, recycling a difficult-to-move resource that was already on site. Perhaps the most telling evidence of this balance is found in the choice of materials itself. While we marvel at the long-distance transport of special stones like Aswan granite, the overwhelming bulk of any structure was always local. The core of the Great Pyramid is local limestone, quarried right from the Giza plateau itself. The mud bricks of Mesopotamian ziggurats came from the very riverbanks beside them. The Inca used the andesite of their mountains. This was a logistical imperative, minimizing the most energy-intensive part of the process, transport, by sourcing the heaviest, bulkiest materials as close as possible. The exotic stones were reserved for symbolic highlights, for the sarcophagus, the obelisk, the facade, where their rarity and beauty carried a specific message. This reveals a sophisticated hierarchy of resource use, a logistical triage that asked, what must come from afar, and what can we find right here? This ancient negotiation between ambition and limitation holds a mirror to our own time. They faced the same fundamental equation we do, the balance between desire and capacity, between the dream of a legacy and the reality of a living world. Their solutions, a mix of dramatic alteration and clever conservation, were shaped by their understanding of the cycles around them. They worked within the rhythms of the Nile flood, the regrowth cycles of forests, and the carrying capacity of their land. When they pushed beyond those cycles, the evidence suggests projects could stall or fail, a silent testament to environmental limits. This final layer of logistics, the management of the Earth itself, completes our picture. It shows that the greatest challenge was not just moving stone, but moving it within a living system that would ultimately determine the success or failure of the entire endeavor. The legacy they left is twofold: the awe-inspiring monument and the subtly altered world that made it possible, a world from which we can still learn profound lessons about scale, endurance, and our place within the natural order. The wheel transformed landscapes from China to Rome, yet it never reached the shores of the Americas before a certain point in history. This simple fact forces a profound comparative question. If the core challenge of moving massive weight was universal, why did the solutions look so dramatically different across the globe? The answer reveals a 22nd pillar of ancient logistics: the power of cultural and environmental adaptation. There was no single master blueprint, but a dazzling array of human ingenuity, each civilization crafting its logistical toolkit from the materials and ideas it had at hand. The contrast between East and West, between continents isolated by oceans, shows us that necessity may be the mother of invention, but culture is its architect. In Eurasia, the invention of the wheel created a powerful logistical feedback loop. Once discovered, it shaped everything. Roads were built for wheeled carts, which allowed for heavier loads over longer distances, which demanded stronger draft animals, which led to better harnesses. This was a cycle of innovation centered on a rolling cylinder. The Roman cursus publicus, with its stone-paved highways for supply wagons, represents the zenith of this wheel-based system. It enabled a centralized, document-driven bureaucracy, where clay tablets and papyrus scrolls could coordinate the movement of grain from Egypt to legions on the Rhine with terrifying efficiency. The system relied on standardization, written orders, and a clear hierarchy, a top-down model of control that mirrored the empire's political structure. Now sail across the world to Rapa Nui, Easter Island. Here, a society without metal, without the wheel, and without large animals faced the same ultimate task: moving multi-ton stone moai across miles of rugged terrain. Their solution emerged from a completely different social and material context. Without wheels for carts, they used the landscape itself as a tool. The prevailing theory, supported by experimental archaeology, suggests they walked the statues upright, rocking them side to side on ropes, using a coordinated pull and pivot motion that made the massive figures appear to stride forward. This method required no paved roads, only a cleared path and perfect rhythm. The labor organization likely reflected this. Instead of a vast, impersonal bureaucracy, it may have been based on kin-based groups or clan rivalries, where community prestige and ancestral devotion provided the motivation. The logistics were decentralized, emerging from social bonds rather than imperial decree. This pattern of adaptation repeats across the isolated continents. In the Andes, the Inca had no wheeled transport, but they had the llama and the most rugged terrain on Earth. Their response was not to fight the mountains, but to weave through them with the Quipu Nyan, a highway system for foot and hoof. Their record-keeping device, the Quipu, was a tactile, knot-based system perfectly suited to an oral culture and a mountainous environment where papyrus would perish. In Mesopotamia, the flat, river-crossed plains were ideal for canals and wheeled vehicles, fostering that early, relentless bureaucracy of cuneiform accounting. Each system was a perfect fit, a bespoke suit of logistics tailored to the environment, the resources, and the social fabric of the people who built it. This global perspective dismantles any notion of a linear progression or a single right way. It was not that one system was more advanced than the other. The Roman system was brilliant for managing a continental empire, but it would have been useless on the steep slopes of Machu Picchu. The Polynesian method of walking statues was ingenious for their island, but could not have supplied a city of 1 million like Rome. What we see is a spectrum of solutions, each a brilliant answer to the same universal equation, but with entirely different variables plugged in. The wheel was not a prerequisite for monumental achievement, it was simply one path among many. This diversity is the real wonder, proving that when faced with the impossible, human cultures do not converge on a single answer. They explode into a constellation of possibilities, each reflecting a unique conversation between a people and their place in the world. Behind every royal decree and every ton of moved stone stood a pragmatic mind with 1,000 daily problems to solve. We know the names of kings and gods, but the true architects of these wonders were the anonymous engineers, foremen, and logisticians, the men who translated a grand vision into the gritty reality of mud, sweat, and splintered wood. They were the original project managers operating without a single digital tool, their authority etched not in titles but in results. Think of the site manager at Giza, likely a senior scribe or royal official. His day did not begin with philosophy but with inventory. He would consult his papyrus logs from the previous evening, checking the tally of stone blocks in the storage yard against the construction schedule for the week. He needed to know which work gang was assigned to the northern ramp, whether the carpenters had repaired enough sledges, and if the bakery had produced the extra bread ration for a crew that had exceeded its hauling quota. His decisions were a constant balancing act of materials, manpower, and morale. A sudden sandstorm could halt work, requiring him to redeploy hundreds of men to interior carving or maintenance tasks. A report of a cracked block meant sending a runner to the quarries to demand a replacement, while recalculating the entire sequence for that section of the pyramid face. This was high-stakes logistics in real time, where a single miscalculation could create a bottleneck that stalled the entire worksite for days. Then there was the quarry foreman, a man whose expertise was written in the stone itself. Stationed for years at a remote site like Aswan, his reputation rested on the flawless quality of every monolith that left his domain. He was a geologist, a production supervisor, and a quality control inspector in one. Using the ancient technique of sounding, tapping the granite with a stone to listen for the telltale ring of perfection, he would personally approve the vein for each major obelisk. He oversaw the teams that carved the trenches and undercut the blocks, a process where a single misplaced strike could ruin months of work. His responsibility extended to the loading operations, ensuring the colossal stones were correctly positioned on their massive river barges without causing a catastrophic capsize. His name is lost, but his standard of excellence is visible in every smooth face of granite that still stands. Perhaps the most adventurous role was that of the route scout. Before any block could be moved, this individual or a small team had to walk the entire proposed path. They were the human sensors of the empire, assessing the land with a practiced eye. Their report would determine the fate of the entire transport operation. Was the soil of this desert corridor firm enough to support a 200-ton load, or would it soften into a trap under the weight? Did that gentle-looking slope hide a shelf of unstable rock? Where was the closest source of water for the hauling teams and for wetting the sand to reduce friction? They looked for natural features to use as landmarks and identified where temporary ramps or leveled beds would need to be built. The scout's judgment was the first and most critical risk assessment, turning a blank space on the mental map into a viable, step-by-step route. We catch fleeting glimpses of these individuals in the records. Tomb inscriptions of middle-ranking officials boast of their service, saying they were the one who organized the workforces of 10,000 or who ensured the timely delivery of materials. Administrative tablets from Mesopotamia list the names of foremen who were held accountable for the output of their specific crews. These fragments allow us to piece together a portrait of immense, quiet competence. These were not slaves toiling mindlessly, but skilled professionals executing a complex plan. They possessed a deep, tactile knowledge of their craft, whether it was the feel of good mortar or the sound of solid granite. They solved problems on the fly, innovating with the materials at hand. Most importantly, they understood the human element. They knew when to push a crew to meet a deadline and when to call for a rest, when to reward good work with an extra beer ration, and how to mediate disputes that could erupt among thousands of men living in close quarters. They were the indispensable middle layer, the translators who stood between the divine pharaoh in his palace and the sweating laborer on the ramp. Their legacy is the monument itself, a testament not to anonymous toil, but to orchestrated genius, a symphony conducted by countless forgotten maestros. A satellite passes silently over a dense jungle canopy, its sensors seeing what the human eye cannot. This is the new frontier of archaeology, where 21st century technology is peeling back the earth and the forest to reveal the true, breathtaking scale of ancient planning. The 24th pillar of these hidden systems is modern revelation itself, the suite of tools that is finally allowing us to map the full, continental nervous system of the past. For generations, we studied monuments in isolation, seeing only the final, magnificent product. Now, we are learning to see the journey. Take LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. This technology works by firing millions of laser pulses from an aircraft down through vegetation. By measuring how long each pulse takes to bounce back, it can create an exquisitely detailed three-dimensional map of the ground surface, stripping away every leaf, every branch to reveal the shape of the earth itself. In the jungles of Central America, LiDAR has performed nothing short of magic. Where explorers once saw only a few Maya pyramids poking through the trees, LiDAR surveys have now revealed vast, interconnected urban landscapes. They show not just the grand plazas, but the elevated causeways that linked cities, the terraced agricultural fields that fed them, and the intricate networks of reservoirs and canals that managed their water. Suddenly, a single temple is understood as a node in a sprawling logistical web, a hub connected by engineered roads that moved people, goods, and ideas across a challenging environment. It is as if we have been given a satellite map of an entire civilization, a blueprint of their daily life and their grand ambitions laid bare. From the sky, other satellites use different eyes. Multispectral imaging can detect subtle differences in soil moisture and plant health. A buried stone wall or the compacted earth of an ancient road affects how vegetation grows above it. From orbit, these tools can trace the faint, ghostly lines of pathways leading from long-forgotten quarries, or outline the rectangular foundations of worker settlements that have been plowed under for centuries. An archaeologist no longer has to rely on luck or decades of painstaking survey on foot. They can scan thousands of square miles from a desk, identifying promising targets with pinpoint accuracy. This is how lost cities are found, not by a lone adventurer, but by a pattern of pixels that whispers something is down there. Then, once a site is located, the investigation goes underground without moving a single shovel. Ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, sends radio waves into the earth and listens to the echoes. Different materials like stone, clay, or voids reflect the signal in unique ways. This allows researchers to create a sonogram of the soil, revealing the footprints of buildings, the outlines of storage pits, and even the layout of streets in buried settlements like those at Giza. We are no longer guessing about the size of a worker's city. We can see its neighborhoods. We can locate its bakeries and its administrative buildings, understanding how it was organized to sustain the human machine. It is a form of respectful, non-invasive archaeology, letting the past speak without disturbing its rest. These technologies are doing more than just finding new things. They are fundamentally changing the story. They provide the hard data to test our theories about scale and capability. When a LiDAR map shows 100 miles of raised causeway connecting Maya centers, we can calculate the labor investment with new precision. When satellite imagery traces a straight line from a quarry to a distant temple complex, we can model the route and understand the choices the engineers made. This evidence is painting a picture of ancient societies that were more interconnected, more populous, and far more sophisticated in their landscape management than we ever dared to assume. The monuments were just the tips of icebergs, and we are now mapping the submerged mountains that supported them. This connection between past and present is deeply poetic. We use our most advanced tools, born from silicon and satellites, to finally comprehend the intelligence of those who worked with copper and stone. We are decoding the logistical fingerprints of ancient engineers, reading the plans they left not on papyrus, but directly onto the face of the earth. Each hidden road revealed, each buried settlement mapped, is a line of dialogue recovered from a conversation that has been silent for millennia. It tells us that their vision was not limited to a single building site, but encompassed entire regions, shaped rivers and forests, and coordinated thousands of lives across generations. The true scale of their achievement is only now coming into focus, and it is more awe-inspiring than any single statue or pyramid could ever be alone. This technological renaissance in archaeology leaves us with a humbling thought. If we can see so much more of their world today, what invisible systems of our own will future generations one day uncover? The silent, empty quarries and the worn pathways leading to them tell a final, profound story. When we step back from the stones and the ramps and the clay tablets, we are left with a single, resonant question. What does this mastery of logistics, this invisible architecture of coordination, truly reveal about the societies that built it? The answer points us toward the very definition of civilization itself. This logistical prowess was not a side effect of a complex society. It was the primary evidence of one. It required a constellation of advanced human capacities working in concert. First, it demanded abstract thinking on a breathtaking scale. A master architect had to hold the complete, three-dimensional form of a pyramid in his mind for decades, then break that vision down into thousands of sequential, interdependent tasks. This is the birth of true project management, the ability to think in systems and processes, not just in objects. Second, it required a commitment to long-term planning that utterly defies our modern, short-term mindset. A pharaoh breaking ground at Giza knew he would not live to see its capstone placed. The planners, the quarrymen, the foremen, all were working for a future they would never personally witness. This generational patience implies a powerful sense of continuity, a belief that the community and its values would endure beyond any single lifetime. Third, and perhaps most critically, it demonstrated an incredible degree of social cohesion and shared purpose, mobilizing tens of thousands from diverse regions, feeding them, housing them, and directing their labor toward a single goal for decades required more than just royal authority. It required a collective buy-in, a cultural narrative so compelling that individuals would contribute their sweat to a project whose full glory would only be appreciated by their grandchildren. This is the antithesis of a society fragmented by internal strife. It is the signature of a culture unified by a common vision. Finally, this entire monumental effort speaks to a profound, almost defiant human desire to create a legacy. It was a declaration etched in stone, a message to the future saying, "We were here, we were capable of this, remember us." The logistics were the means, but the end was eternity. Therefore, the ability to coordinate human activity across vast spans of time and space is not merely a technical skill. It is a core hallmark of a complex civilization. It measures a society's ability to translate collective imagination into tangible reality. This perspective offers a crucial correction to popular mysteries. Studying these hidden systems teaches us less about mythical lost technologies or outside intervention, and far more about the extraordinary, untapped potential of organized human collaboration. The real wonder is not that aliens might have built the pyramids, but that human beings did. They did it with careful observation, with trial and error, with social organization, and with a patient generational will. This is the powerful, humbling lesson these silent stones hold for our own era. We face global challenges of a similar scale: climate coordination, supply chain resilience, large-scale infrastructure. Our tools are incomparably more powerful, but the core challenge remains the same. Can we muster the same quality of long-term vision, the same degree of social coordination, the same commitment to a future we may not personally see? The ancient logistical networks stand as a testament, not to how different we are from our ancestors, but to the enduring heights we can reach when we choose to work together with purpose across the expanse of time. Even the most brilliant system leaves traces of its own uncertainty. For all we have uncovered about the hidden networks of supply and coordination, the ancient world has not surrendered all its secrets. There remain logistical puzzles so elegant, so baffling, that they resist our most advanced explanations. These are not gaps in the story, but its most intriguing chapters, the places where the past whispers that we have more to learn. They stand as enduring mysteries, the final, unanswered questions written in stone and earth. Consider the great trilithons of Stonehenge. We have plausible theories for how the massive Sarsen stones were dragged from the Marlborough Downs and how the smaller bluestones journeyed from Wales. We can envision the use of earthen ramps, ropes, and levers, but the precise, final act of raising those 25-ton horizontal lintels to perch perfectly atop their uprights, over 13 feet in the air, remains a subject of fierce debate and experimentation. Did they build a giant, sloping earth ramp behind one upright, drag the lintel up, and then carefully remove the ramp? Did they use a primitive but effective form of cribbing, stacking timber frames to lift the stone inch by agonizing inch? Or was there a clever, now forgotten technique involving levers and counterweights that left no archaeological trace? Every proposed method works in theory, yet each presents its own daunting practical challenges on the windswept Salisbury Plain. The mystery endures because the solution was likely a masterpiece of on-the-spot ingenuity, a clever trick known only to the builders who stood there, their method lost when the work was done. Then there is the puzzle of the Baalbek Megaliths in modern-day Lebanon. The Roman temple complex there is staggering, but its foundation contains 3 blocks known as the trilithon, each weighing an estimated 800 tons. A fourth, even larger block lies in a nearby quarry, a colossal 1,200 tons, left partially attached to the bedrock. The question is not just how they were moved, but how they were moved so precisely into a tight, interlocking foundation course. The proposed routes from quarry to temple are short, only a third of a mile, but they involve a slight downhill slope. The standard model of log rollers may have been used, but the sheer weight pushes the technique to its absolute limit, risking the crushing of the rollers themselves. Some researchers speculate about a different system, perhaps involving a complex arrangement of pivots and levering, turning the massive stone on a giant, lubricated pivot point to walk it along a prepared track. Yet no contemporary account or clear archaeological evidence confirms the method. The stones simply exist, a silent testament to a solved problem whose solution we can no longer fully read. These open questions serve a vital purpose. They are reminders that our understanding is a map, and every map has its edges. The mysteries are not failures of archaeology, but invitations. They encourage us to keep looking, to re-examine old evidence with new eyes, to run another computer simulation, or to attempt another physical experiment. They ensure that the study of the ancient world remains a living, breathing discipline, driven by curiosity rather than certainty. Each unsolved puzzle humbles our modern arrogance, suggesting that the builders possessed nuances of knowledge, specific tricks of terrain or teamwork that have not yet crossed the millennia to us. This is where wonder truly lies, in the space between what we can prove and what we can only admire. It is a space that honors the ancient engineers, acknowledging that their greatest cleverness might still be hidden, waiting for a future generation to finally understand the full depth of their silent, stone-laid genius. From the sledges on the Giza plateau to the runners on the Inca trails, we have traced the invisible networks that built our world's wonders. This journey reveals a truth more astonishing than any myth of lost technology or outside intervention. Our ancestors were master planners, coordinators, and engineers, operating on a scale that still takes our breath away. They teach us that the greatest human achievements are never solitary acts of genius, but the culmination of countless coordinated efforts, a symphony of purpose played out across a continent and across generations. Each stone in a pyramid or a distant temple is a frozen moment in a vast, interconnected story. It is the story of a quarryman's careful tap, a scout's assessment of a desert path, a scribe's mark on a clay tablet, and the shared rhythm of 1,000 pullers on a rope. These were not monuments built by magic, but by a meticulous human-made system, a hidden architecture of organization that turned impossible dreams into permanent reality. So the next time you see an image of an ancient wonder, train your eye to look past the imposing facade. See not just the stone, but the journey. See the river that carried it, the road that guided it, the hands that shaped it, and the generations of minds that held the plan. See the invisible web that connected a mountain quarry to a sacred skyline, a testament to what we can accomplish when we channel our collective will toward a single, enduring horizon. If this exploration of humanity's hidden organizational prowess resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more journeys into the past's deepest mysteries. Share in the comments below which ancient logistical feat amazes you the most.